Oh hi, Taryn here with Elegant Upgrades, and wow, we got our piece cut out for us this week. So this is the Ugly Duckling Challenge put on by Corey from DesertDIY, and I feel like this is a really good contender. It is hideous and also obviously free because nobody would spend money on it. It's just bad. So follow along, let's see what we can do to it. So I found this piece on OfferUp for free. Obviously, nobody wanted it, but I didn't pay attention to the measurements, and I was thinking this was a much smaller piece on my way to get it, and did not realize the size when I put it in my car, which was full. So now that that's over, I'm just looking it over, seeing what needs to be done to it. The top is really rough. I'm pretty sure it must have been on purpose at some point. It's not solid wood, so I can't really sand it back and get it smooth. It's just going to have this textured finish. I think maybe the previous owners must have spray painted it over the top of the factory finish texture which came on it. And then the body of the piece has a bunch of texture too, which I wasn't mad about, and the drawers are actually in really good shape, so that was a great find. The hardware I can't use because it's missing one of the pulls and potentially another. I'm gonna have to look in my car and see if I can find it. So I'm just taking my chalk mountain cleaner. This doesn't need anything crazy because it was actually a pretty clean piece, and it doesn't need primer or anything. It's not too slick of a surface. It's got its own texture already, so I can work with that. I mean, it's just a really easy, basic clean here. So I am using my scrubby pad just because I feel like it kind of gives it a light sanding, and also make sure that I get any dust out of, any crevices that are thrown on there. So I printed out this awesome picture that I've been wanting to use for a long time to decoupage on here, and since I'm not priming the piece, I need to give myself a blank canvas to place the papers on. If I didn't do this, then you would see kind of the weird, I don't know, sponge painty texture that, I don't know, it's just bad, and that would show through your papers. And also if you give yourself a lighter base like this white or a light gray, which is typically what I use with my primer, it actually makes the papers pop. So you do want to make sure that you give yourself a nice base for your papers to go on. I'm using my Chalk Mountain Satin Poly, as per usual, and then this paper is in 2 sheets because I wanted a larger print, so I knew that I would apply the bottom one easily here on this drawer so that I don't have to worry about more breaks than necessary. So I know that this one's going to go here, and so I'll just work on getting the bottom paper on first. These drawers don't sit in the frame, they sit outside and around it. So it's going to be a little more difficult to apply this, but that's okay. You just curve over the edges as you're going down, and then we're actually going to have to cut thin strips to go along those little areas there too, but it's going to look good, don't worry. So I'm using just the smallest amount of poly here because the paper is super, super, super thin. And if you get it too thick, it gets it too wet, too fast, and then you run the risk of ripping and tearing, which probably happens on nearly every sheet of tissue paper that I do that's this thin, but I mean, you can work with it, but if you can avoid that, that's what you should do. This is also a curved surface, so I'm working in smaller sections. And as you can see, I'm just using the back of my finger to gently place it down and kind of smooth it out. And then once you get it down, you can kind of go over it and get it on there and make sure that it's suctioned down to where you want it. And then before I stick the very, very bottom, I'm going to just take a pair of scissors and cut this. It's going to curve under a little bit, and you'll never see that, but you do want to have it on there because you don't want the papers to roll up anywhere. So you just cut it a little bit longer, and then you can put the poly on there and round the papers up underneath the edge of the drawer. And then of course you take your poly and go over the entire piece to seal it in. So this is the part I was telling you about. You're going to do just a strip along here. It's kind of a pain, I'm not gonna lie. I don't want to be like, oh, this is super fun to do. This part's not that fun because you want to make sure that the picture is lined up as best you can. You go off the edges on this instead of doing the center, because it's always going to look kind of off because it's set back further than the drawer fronts. But the way that we're painting this in, it will camouflage all that, so that's a plus. And then also on this strip, I didn't worry about it matching, going from top to bottom on this whole piece. Mostly I just wanted to make sure that it was covering the center section and was overlapped by the drawers on top and on bottom. And then everything else I'll go through and paint it in also so that it looks seamless. But yeah, so I just started from left to right. I went through, put a little bit of poly, and then it's actually really easy once you get it down to just swipe it along and move it along on its way. And then of course, sealing it over the top. And then here, I don't actually have the drawers pushed all the way in. I'm just pushing them in enough so that I can see where everything is. So they're not touching. You don't want to close your drawers right now. Obviously, you have wet poly on everything. So this is just the same process. We're going to do the exact same thing, adding the poly, wrapping it over the top, and then this doesn't finish out at the bottom, so this was an easy finish. And then sealing it in. This will get another coat of poly as we're finished with the paint and everything too. So I always do more than one coat of poly over the top, but it's a really good base to start with. That way when you're doing paint, you have something to kind of work over the top of without damaging your papers. So here I am just choosing my paint colors. I'm just kind of going through my stash, seeing what colors I feel will work best with this. And a lot of times I don't even use all the colors that I have out. I just want them there just in case. And since this print is so dark, I decided to do a base of black everywhere. This whole piece is going to be black anyways, but in the painting, it's done with a lot of layers. And so layering paint is kind of where you need to start. So it never looks good at first. You just kind of know that that's what's going to happen and keep going with it until it starts to look kind of like what you want it to. And then also keep in mind that the colors are going to change as the paint dries. So these are all kind of things that as you start doing it more and more, you'll kind of get a feel for it. And I've got a lot of different brushes out because they all leave different textures and different shapes, and that's all necessary for these kind of painting in your pieces. So I've got leaves to work with, and at the very bottom I have like little flower buds and all kinds of shapes and colors and everything that kind of need their own brush. So these chip brushes are awesome because they look a lot like leaves when you dab them in like that. And then the leaves had a ton of different like cooler greens and warmer greens, and so I'm just going back and forth with all of those, just getting everything on and in and building up the layers before I then worry about making it look perfect. As you can see, I kind of start with my darker colors first and then end on the lighter colors. And then I'll go back through with my black and kind of pounce and meld everything in. Most of this is just kind of pouncing and stippling and things like that because it looks closest to what the image is. Now, if you had kind of a swirlier image, you would then swirl your brush instead of tapping or pouncing. You just kind of look at what you have and try and replicate that. And don't be afraid of going over the top of the tissue paper because that will actually help it look more set into the piece. And keep in mind this is multiple coats because I'm letting it dry in between those. So it looks like one long session, but it's not. I've actually gone back over, and you can kind of change things as things dry. And then the whole rest of the piece, again, is getting a coat of black, which I've already said. And then I can start spreading it out. But I want the kind of overall look of this to just be kind of dark. That's why I love this image, because it's so, so dark, but just the very center of the woman on the swing is so bright and cheerful, where everything else is just kind of foreboding. You should look up this image. I'll leave the name of everything down below. It's kind of funny. So now's where we can start being a little more haphazard. So I'm not trying to blend the sides into the image. I'm just trying to kind of bring some of the colors over. So it's very soft and it doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm bringing a lot of the colors from the inner part of the image to the curves on the drawers. And it's going to be toned down a lot, and you'll just be able to see it in certain lights, and it'll just be kind of like this soft, dreamy black look, which is just, it's so good. And again, you can do this with any colors, any picture. I mean, you could choose this picture and you could have done this entire piece in green or in the coral color. The green would probably be easier, but I mean, you can change it up. Do whatever colors that you want that suit you. I just knew I wanted to have this piece be dark, so that's the route I went, but you can totally change it and have it be a much brighter, happier piece. Then I'm going to seal the entire thing with my Chalk Mountain Satin Poly. As you can see, I get it on there a lot, and then I can use longer strokes to smooth it out and make sure there's no brush strokes in this. Not that it really matters because the piece itself was so textured, but that's how I put on my poly. So this is a fun thing. I needed something on the sides. They had a bit of a frame out, and anytime that there's a frame on my pieces, I feel like I have to do something in them. So I'm not the hugest fan of tape, but for stripes, I'm willing to do it. So I just got out my painter's tape, and I am filling out the frame on the sides with my stripes. And then they kind of have some interesting corners, so I'll use the tape, and I'm not precise. I'm not using an X-Acto knife or anything like that. I literally just tear my tape into kind of rounds and stick it on that way. But I just make sure that I really, really get the tape down, because the medium that I'm going to use is very thin, so there's a huge potential for bleeding underneath the tape, which is kind of annoying. So you just want to make sure that you have your tape pressed down firmly. And then around the edges in the frame, it's kind of just a divot, so I make sure that I use my nail to really, really press the tape in there. And then this is actually just more poly. This has already been sealed, but I'm only putting the poly on here to get a clear coat on first, so that if the tape or anything is going to bleed underneath the tape, it's just the poly and it won't matter. So now I'm taking my dust from Chalk Mountain. This one is silver, and I'm mixing it with the same poly that I was just using. I just had it in this tray, and that's what I rolled it on with. I'm adding as much silver as I want. You can do a ton if you want it super opaque. You can do a small amount if you want it just kind of like an ethereal glow. This is a very ethereal glow amount. So as you can see, it barely looks like anything's happening, but I'm rolling it on now, and I'm just trying to make sure that it's even, because you can kind of see some kind of like darker and lighter areas. Just make sure that that's evened out before you pull your tape. And now you can tell that, oh yeah, there's something on there, and it looks awesome, and it's super subtle. It's not like an in-your-face stripe, but it's very beautiful, and it goes great over, because I did the sides the same way I did the sides of the drawers, how it's kind of like a moody blend inside there. And now I'm going to go over this entire piece with a green wax. So I know that sounds so crazy, but this piece was really, really textured, and I wanted to use that to my advantage. So I mixed up some white wax, some green wax, and a little bit of green paint, swirled it together, and then when you put it on and wipe it back, I wiped it back immediately. I'm not using this to seal my piece, so it doesn't matter how long it's been sitting on there before you wipe it back. But I wiped it back right away, and you can see it kind of gives a cloudier finish to the piece, and also sets more into like the alligatory lines that were inside there. So it gives a really cool finish. And I actually went over the image as well. And now we're just going to add on the hardware, and this guy's done. Oh hi, we're back again, but now with a finished piece. It's perfect. I love it. So excited. Can't wait to get it listed. I just want to do a quick thanks to Corey for letting me be a part of this collaboration, and as always, a huge thank you to all you guys who have been supporting me. I'm so thankful, just more than words can say. All right, we're done. Here's some pictures for you.